the most relevant detail is that I spent about 15 years writing this, and I worked on it about 3 hours a day, every day during that period of time. At the same time, I was finishing off my doctorate, and I started lecturing at Harvard, but I was doing that continually and thinking about it continually and reading the material that I needed to read in order to write the book continually as well. And I didn't realize until more recently that what I was doing was at the heart of the postmodern conundrum, I would say. I was very much obsessed by the events of the Cold War for reasons I don't exactly understand. I had a lot of dreams about nuclear annihilation for years on end. I mean, it wasn't that uncommon to be obsessed by that when I grew up. I mean, because it was a preoccupation of everyone who was my age, I suppose. There were lots of years, probably between 1962, I would say, probably in 1985, where people were pretty convinced that the probability of a nuclear war was high, much higher now than people consider now. And I was curious about this. I was curious about why everyone wasn't obsessed about this all the time. First of all, because it seemed like the fundamental issue that two armed camps were pointing something in excess of 25,000 hydrogen bombs each at each other. I couldn't understand how anybody could concentrate on anything other than that, since it seemed so utterly insane. And I was curious, what was going on exactly? Was this one explanation was that there's a very large number of ways that human beings could organize themselves in society, like a large number of games that we could hypothetically play, and they're all equally arbitrary in an equally arbitrary universe, and that the communists had decided to play one kind of game, and the West and the Western free market democratic types had decided to play another game, and it was all arbitrary in some sense. And so that's what I was trying to figure out, was what the hell was going on with this conflict? And was it merely a battle between two hypothetically equally valid interpretations of the world drawn from a set of extraordinarily large potential interpretations, which I think would be essentially a postmodernist take on it? And I think I went into the problem neutrally, in that I didn't think I knew what the answer was. You know, so lots of times when you talk to people who think, or when you talk to people who write, they have an idea and it's right, and then they write whatever they're writing to justify the idea. That's how they look at it. But it's not a good way to write. A good way to write and think is to have a problem and then try to solve it, right? To actually solve it, not to demonstrate that your a priori commitment is true. And, you know, one of the signs, I would say, that my a priori commitments weren't the purpose for the writing was that I walked away from that 15-year project with a view of the world that was completely different than the view that I had going in, and learned all sorts of things, especially about the role of narrative and religious thinking in life that I had no idea was possible when I started. And a lot of that was a consequence of reading the great people who I read deeply. You know, I read, well, all the great works of Friedrich Nietzsche and the great works of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and most of Jung's collected works, everything that had been published up to that point, and a very large swath of the relevant clinical literature, the great clinicians of the 20th century, and a huge stack of neuroscience, and et cetera, because I was reading constantly during this time. And I realized some things that I think are true. The communists were wrong. They weren't, and not just a little bit wrong, and not wrong in some arbitrary way. They were playing a game that human beings cannot play without descending into a murderous catastrophe. And there's something about what we've done in the West that's correct.